We graduated high school and decided to prove something to ourselves before life closed in. My buddy and I drove to the Grand Canyon with packs that were too heavy in confidence that had not yet been tested by heat or distance. We picked a trail based on how hard it sounded. Tanner Trail stood out because it was marked as difficult and remote. That was enough for us. We did not research much beyond a map and the idea that hard meant real. We started before sunrise, but the heat was already building. The trail dropped fast and kept dropping. Switchbacks cut into pale rock. The air was still and dry. Sweat soaked through my shirt within minutes. The canyon walls glowed orange and red as the sun climbed. Every step down felt easy in the moment and dangerous later. We joked less as the hours went on. Our mouths stayed dry no matter how often we drank. Water tasted flat and warm. The trail narrowed and vanished in places. We followed cairns and faint paths etched into stone. The silence pressed in. No wind. No birds. No insects. The canyon felt empty in a way that made time stretch. By late morning the heat was brutal. The thermometer on my pack strap climbed past numbers I had never seen outside of a car dashboard. The rock radiated heat upward. My boots felt soft. My legs shook when we stopped. We had not seen another person all day. No footprints that looked recent. No voices carried on the air. That isolation felt exciting at first, and then it felt heavy. We were two small figures dropping into something vast and indifferent. I kept thinking about the climb back out and pushed the thought away. The last miles followed a dry creek bed. The walls closed in, and the ground turned to sand and rounded stone. The creek had carved a shallow channel that guided us toward the river. The sound of water grew slowly. At first it was a faint rush that could have been wind. Then it became constant. We rounded boulders baked white by the sun. The river appeared suddenly, wide and brown and fast. The Colorado filled the canyon with noise and motion. At the mouth of the creek stood a man. He was close to the water, where the current curled around rocks. He looked out of place, and also like he belonged there more than we did. He had long black hair that hung straight down his back. His shirt was denim and tucked into his jeans. His boots were worn and practical. He moved with no hurry. He did not look toward us as we approached. It took a few seconds to understand what he was doing. He held a small ball in his hand and tossed it into the rapids. The ball shot downstream, struck a rock, and came back toward him in a tight arc. He caught it and did it again. Each throw was the same. The timing was exact. The ball traveled a short distance and returned as if guided. He stood in the heat without shade and repeated the motion without effort. We were exhausted and focused on survival basics. Find a place to camp. Get out of the sun. Filter water. The man glanced in our direction once, and then went back to the river. We moved upstream along the bank, stepping carefully on slick stones. The river noise swallowed everything else. When I looked back again, he was already walking downstream, moving along the edge with steady steps. Within moments, he was gone around a bend. The canyon returned to empty. We found a flat spot above the high water line and dropped our packs. My hands shook as I set up the tent. The heat lingered even as the sun dropped behind the rim. The ground stayed warm. My skin felt tight and sore. We ate without appetite and drank until our stomachs sloshed. Darkness came fast. The river kept roaring. Sleep did not come easily. The air stayed hot. Every sound felt close. The river shifted tones through the night as if breathing. I kept replaying the image of the man and the ball. At first it was just odd. Then it nagged. The trail was empty. The place was remote. The heat was dangerous. Yet he had been there alone, calm, repeating a precise act that required knowledge of the water. I thought about how he knew exactly where to stand and where to throw. I thought about how the ball came back every time. At some point I sat up and scanned the dark with my headlamp. The beam caught nothing but rock and scrub. No footsteps approached. No shapes moved. Still I did not rest well. Morning came with pale light and a slight drop in temperature. We packed quickly. The climb out waited for no one. The ascent was harder than the descent had been easy. The heat returned with force. Every switchback felt endless. We rationed water carefully. My thoughts narrowed to steps and breath. Hours passed in a blur of stone and glare. When we finally reached the rim, my legs felt hollow. We collapsed near the car and drank the last of our water. Relief washed through me. On the drive home, the canyon receded in the mirrors, but the image of the river stayed sharp. Days later, I found myself reading about the area. I learned that river runners and guides sometimes test currents with small balls to read hydraulics and eddies. A racquetball is bright and buoyant. In fast water, it can reveal a return flow. Throw it into the right spot, and it comes back. It is a simple trick for someone who knows rivers. That explanation settled the question in a practical way. The man had likely been scouting the rapid at the mouth of the creek. He knew the water because he worked it or lived near it. He wore clothes that made sense for sun and stone. He moved with confidence because he belonged there. We were the strangers passing through. What stayed with me was not fear of him, but the reminder of how unprepared we were. We had treated the canyon like a challenge rating on a sign. He treated it like a system to be read and respected. That night by the river I slept poorly because my body knew what my mind had not yet accepted. We were small and vulnerable in a place that demanded attention. The canyon did not threaten us. It simply did not care. The man with the ball understood that. We learned it the hard way, and were lucky enough to leave with the lesson intact. We had camped all over the El Dorado National Forest for years, long enough that certain places started to feel like ours. Not owned, not claimed, just familiar. Sopiago Springs was one of those places. A bend in the creek where the water slowed and widened, with granite shelves for sitting and a stand of mixed pine and oak that broke the wind. We had slept there more times than I could count, in every season that did not involve snow. Nothing bad had ever happened there. That history mattered to us, because it made what happened stand out. That weekend we planned a 3-day foraging camp. We wanted to keep it light and simple. A few MREs as backup, some guns for small game and safety, basic shelter gear, and enough water to get us started. We planned to rely on the creek and what we could catch or gather. The weather was stable. No storms forecast. Late summer, dry air, warm days, cool nights. Conditions that usually make the woods feel open and forgiving. The hiking was normal. Dust on the trail, the smell of sun-baked pine needles, the constant sound of water pulling us downhill toward the creek. We reached the spot by early afternoon and set camp without hurry. We had done it enough times that everyone fell into a rhythm without talking. One person clearing ground, another setting a simple tarp shelter, someone else checking the water for crawdads. By dusk we had food cooking. Crawdads pulled from under rocks, a squirrel taken cleanly, cooked slow over the fire. We ate, drank a couple beers, listened to the creek, and slept hard. No dreams, no disturbances, no sense of anything being wrong. The next morning felt different right away. It was not fear at first. It was absence. No birds calling. No squirrels scolding from the trees. Even the insects seemed reduced to almost nothing. The creek still moved, but the sound felt thinner, like it was not filling the space the way it should. I noticed it while I was washing my hands in the water. I stayed crouched there longer than needed, listening and not hearing much of anything. I had grown up in the woods. I knew what quiet meant when a bear passed through, or when a mountain lion was nearby. That quiet has a shape to it. It moves, then releases. This was not that. This felt fixed, like something had settled in, and everything else had decided to wait. Another friend felt it too. We had both had strange moments in that part of the forest before, nothing dramatic, just moments of being watched that never turned into anything. We did not talk about it that morning. We went about the day, checking traps, walking the creek, scanning the tree line without admitting we were doing it. The sun climbed high, and the forest stayed muted. No sudden relief. No return of normal sound. By late afternoon, the feeling sat heavy in my chest. I tried to shake it off by staying busy. I cut wood. I rearranged gear that did not need rearranging. I checked the fire pit again and again. When evening came, 2 of my friends decided to walk upstream to take care of some things. About 200 yards, maybe a bit more. They took the only 2 flashlights we had brought. We had never needed more before. I stayed back to tend the camp and fire. As soon as they disappeared into the trees, the pressure increased. It felt like the space behind me had weight. The woods across the creek, opposite the direction they went, felt close even though they were not. I fed the fire until it threw hard light and sparks. I grabbed a rifle and kept it within reach. I told myself I was overreacting, that this was just nerves layered on old memories, but my body did not listen. That was when I heard the voices. They were not clear enough to be words. Low sounds, almost like murmuring carried through brush. They came from the dark timber beyond the firelight, not from where my friends had gone. They were too soft to place, but too steady to be wind. I stood and strained to listen, leaning forward without meaning to. The sounds would stop when I focused, then start again when I tried to relax. I scanned the trees with my eyes, letting the firelight do what it could. Beyond the ring of light, the forest turned solid black. No moon yet. No stars through the canopy. I kept telling myself that if something was there, it would show itself. Animals make noise. People make noise. The woods does not hide things without reason. Movement caught my eye to the left of the fire, far enough out that the light barely touched it. 50 yards, maybe a little more. Something shifted between two trunks. Not fast. Not slow. Controlled. I brought the rifle up and looked through the scope. The image snapped into place and my stomach dropped. The outline was wrong. The body shape was human enough to recognize, but it was low to the ground, balanced on all fours. The arms looked too long, bent at sharp angles, hands planted wide. The back was narrow and the head hung forward. It reminded me of an ape posture, but thinner, stretched. I could not see a face. The firelight caught the side of it just enough to show skin, where fur should have been. It paused, turned slightly, then moved away with a loping motion that ate distance fast and quiet. No crash. No panic. Just gone, deeper into the trees. I held the scope on the spot long after it disappeared. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. I did not fire. I did not shout. I stood there and listened. The forest answered with movement. Light rustling from different points around the camp, always staying outside the firelight. Leaves shifting. A twig snapping here, another there. Never close, never far. Always on the side opposite, where my friends had gone. It felt like the space was being tested, like lines were being drawn just out of reach. I kept the fire fed until my arms shook from lifting wood. I scanned the dark until my eyes hurt. I never saw it again, but I knew it had not left. The sounds kept circling, slow and patient. The voices came back once, faint and low, then faded. When my friends returned, the pressure broke just enough for my legs to feel weak. They found me standing, rifle up, glassing the trees like I was waiting for something to charge. I told them everything without pacing or exaggeration. The way the woods had gone quiet. The shape I saw. The sounds after. They did not laugh. Their faces changed as I spoke. They admitted that upstream they had started hearing the same low sounds, coming from the brush, not matching any animal they knew. That was why they turned back early. We changed nothing else that night except our posture. The fire stayed large. We set 3 watch positions, spaced so no one had to turn their back on the dark. No one slept. The forest never returned to normal. The quiet held. The sound stayed at the edges but never crossed into the light. Nothing attacked us. Nothing rushed the camp. That almost made it worse. Predators act. Whatever this was waited. When morning came, the first birds called like they were testing the air. We packed fast, hands clumsy from fatigue. We left food behind. We did not check traps. We did not follow the creek. We took the most direct route out and did not stop until the trees thinned and the light felt open again. On the hike out, I kept thinking about what I had seen. I needed it to fit into something real. Feral people live in those forests. Illegal grows, long-term squatters, people broken by drugs or isolation. A human moving on all fours, skin exposed, avoiding light, using sound to probe. It fit well enough to be believable. Mange could explain the lack of hair. Long arms could be posture and perspective under stress. Voices could be breath and throat noise shaped by distance. That explanation mattered. It still does. It is the only reason the memory stays contained. We never camped at Sopiago Springs again. Not because we believed in anything unnatural, but because we learned something practical and hard. Familiar places can change without warning. The woods does not owe you comfort, even when it has given it before. Whatever watched us that night had learned the terrain better than we had, and it had no reason to announce itself. That knowledge was enough to keep us away. The campground had settled into that late-night quiet that feels heavier than silence. The fire at our site had burned down to a low red bed, throwing just enough light to show boots and chair legs and the edge of the picnic table. The rest of the place was swallowed by trees and dark. I had been drinking enough to feel loose, but not enough to be sloppy. I knew where I was. I knew who I was with. When my stomach turned, there was no confusion about what I needed to do. The bathrooms were a quarter-mile down the main path. Everyone else was settled in. I said I was heading out and grabbed my phone for a weak flashlight, then stepped off the site and onto the gravel. The light barely reached my shoes. The trees closed in fast. The campground was older and poorly maintained. Many sites were unused, their spurs branching off into nothing but weeds and shadows. The air smelled like damp leaves and smoke that never fully leaves your clothes. About halfway down the path, my light caught movement ahead. Someone stepped out from one of the unused site paths and onto the main trail. That alone did not bother me. People wander at night. What stopped me was the way the person walked. It was my friend. He had a strange gait that I had known for years. One foot rolled inward, the other kicked slightly forward. It was unmistakable. The shape of his shoulders matched. The height matched. The pace matched. I felt relief because the dark had been getting to me more than I wanted to admit. He stayed well ahead of me, always about 40 feet. At several points he turned halfway around and moved his arms in a way that suggested annoyance. The distance made it hard to see his face, but his body language felt directed at me. I kept walking, confused about why he had come from such a strange direction. That spur led to a site that had been empty all day. No car, no tent, nothing. He picked up his pace. I tried to close the distance, but the path curved and dipped, and the darkness swallowed him. After a moment he was gone. I reached the bathrooms without seeing him again. The building buzzed with insects and old fluorescent lights. I finished quickly, more focused on the strange walk than the task itself. When I returned to camp, he was there, sitting exactly where he had been when I left. Calm. Normal. Not acting at all like someone who had just tried to mess with me. I asked what the hell that was about. Every person there said he never left. They had been sitting the whole time. Nobody cracked a smile. Nobody laughed. I chalked it up to a bad attempt at a joke that fell flat, mixed with low light and alcohol. I let it go because there was nothing else to do with it. Sleep came in pieces. At some point after 3, I woke with pressure in my bladder. The fire was dead now. The campsite was black except for the faint glow of the sky through the trees. I did not bother with shoes. I stepped away from the tents and into the woods just far enough to have privacy. The ground was cold and uneven. When I finished and turned back, I heard the sound of a tent zipper. The sound was clear and close. I could make out a figure by the tents. The shape stood and shifted weight. Again the walk was wrong in the same familiar way. I felt irritation more than fear. I watched as the figure moved slightly away from the tents. A lighter sparked. The brief flashes lit his face in fragments. The nose, the brow, the stubble. It was him. When the flame caught, the cigarette glowed, and the light showed him clearly enough that there was no doubt in my mind. He stood there smoking, head tilted, shoulders slouched in that exact way. I felt the same confusion as before, mixed now with anger. He started walking toward the cars. I followed, staying back, expecting him to jump out and laugh or accuse me of something. He passed behind one of the vehicles. I took 2 more steps and rounded the bumper. There was nothing there. The lot was empty. No movement. No footsteps. No door closing. I stood there listening, heart thumping, telling myself he had crouched or moved faster than I thought. I walked straight to his tent and shined my phone at it. It was zipped closed. I put my ear close and heard him breathing in the slow rhythm of deep sleep. I did not sleep after that. Morning brought clarity in a way the dark never allows. Over coffee, I described everything again, this time slower, more carefully. The mood shifted. My friend looked genuinely shaken. He admitted something he had never told us before. He had a history of sleepwalking, especially when drinking. His family had dealt with it for years. He had once left a hotel room and been found in a stairwell. Another time he woke up in a car that was not his. We walked the campground together. The unused site path connected back to the main trail farther down, hidden by brush. A person could move through it without being seen from camp. The cars sat exactly where I had seen him vanish. One of the doors had been unlocked all night. The explanation fit every detail without stretching reality. He had left his tent while asleep during the night, once earlier and once later. His body moved the way it always did. His face was his. The cigarette had been taken from a shared pack. He never remembered any of it. Alcohol had made the episodes worse. Darkness had filled in the gaps. My mind had done the rest. What stayed with me was not fear of something unknown, but the realization of how fragile certainty becomes at night. I had seen something real and misinterpreted nothing. The horror came from understanding that people can move, speak, and act without being present at all, and that memory will never tell you the difference unless the sun comes up and proves it. I was 14 and still small enough that my pack always felt heavier than it should have. That fall trip to IMR was part of our regular Boy Scout calendar, One of those weekends meant to teach cold weather camping before winter settled in. Wisconsin was already turning. Leaves were half down, the ground dark with moisture, the air sharp enough to sting the nose at night. The Indian Mound Reservation was not new to the troop. Leaders treated it with respect, but not fear. It was land with history, and the burial mounds were part of the terrain, quiet rises scattered through the trees like old scars covered in moss. We set camp before sunset. Tents went up in a loose ring around a clearing. Firewood was stacked. The smell of damp earth mixed with smoke as the temperature dropped. I remember noticing how quiet it became once the fire died down. No highway noise. No distant farm equipment. Just wind moving through bare branches and the occasional rustle of something small in the leaves. My tent was a basic two-person dome, thin fabric, zipper door facing the clearing. I shared it with another scout, but he fell asleep fast and heavy. I never did. I lay on my back listening to the night settle. The ground pressed cold through my sleeping pad. I could hear my own breathing inside the nylon, louder than it should have been. Sometime deep into the night I woke without knowing why. No dream. No sound at first. Just that sharp alert feeling that pulls you out of sleep and holds you there. I stayed still, eyes open, watching the faint outline of the tent ceiling. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They were close. Too close to be someone walking through camp. They moved slow and steady, not rushed, not light. Each step dragged slightly, leaves shifting rather than crunching. The ground was damp from earlier rain, and the sound was muted, like someone careful not to make noise but not trying very hard either. The steps moved along the side of my tent. I tracked them without moving my body, only my head turning slightly inside the bag. The fabric bowed inward with a breeze, and the shadows outside shifted as the person moved. The footsteps stopped near the front of the tent, right by the zipper. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to feel deliberate. I waited for a cough, a whisper, a zipper sound, anything that would explain it. Nothing came. The steps turned and moved back the other way, circling the tent again. My heart beat harder, but I stayed quiet. I told myself it was an adult leader doing a head count. Maybe someone checking the perimeter. That made sense. Except the way they walked did not match how adults usually move through camp. No boots crunching. No confident stride. Just that slow drag through leaves. The steps made another loop. Same pattern. Around the side. Stop at the door. Pause. Turn. Back again. I did not feel panic. What I felt was pressure, like the air inside the tent was heavier. My skin prickled along my arms and neck. I had camped plenty before. I knew what people sounded like. I knew what animals sounded like. This felt different, not because it was mysterious, but because it felt intentional. I stayed on my back, eyes fixed on the tent wall, following the sound as it passed. I could picture the path exactly. I could tell when they were near my head and when they moved toward my feet. Each step landed in almost the same place each time, wearing a faint trail in the leaves. At one point the steps stopped longer than before at the door. I held my breath without realizing it. My tent mate shifted and snored, completely unaware. The zipper did not move. The fabric did not press inward. The person simply stood there, close enough that I felt like I could reach out and touch them through the wall. Then they turned and walked away. The steps faded toward the trees, then stopped. I listened for a long time after that, straining to catch any return. Nothing came. Eventually the sounds of the forest took over again. Wind. A branch snapping somewhere far off. An owl calling once. I did not sleep well the rest of that night. Every small sound brought my attention back. When morning came, I felt wrung out and sore like I had been awake for days. I did not say anything to anyone. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I could not explain it cleanly. There was no single moment that crossed into obvious danger. Nothing touched the tent. Nothing spoke. It was just presence, and presence is hard to describe without sounding foolish. During the day we hiked past the burial mounds. They were everywhere once you started noticing them. Low earth rises, some barely knee-high, others taller, all softened by time. Fallen leaves collected along their edges. The leaders explained their significance, reminded us to stay off them. I remember feeling uneasy, but not scared. More aware, like I was walking through someone else's space. The second night came with colder air. Frost formed along the grass in shaded spots. I crawled into my bag early, exhausted. Sleep came faster but lighter. I woke often, checking the tent walls, listening. Nothing happened. No steps. No pauses. Just the quiet weight of night. We packed up the next morning and left without incident. Life moved on. I told myself the experience was just nerves or imagination fed by stories and history. Years later, I learned what likely happened. Imar bordered public land. Local hunters and hikers used the trails, even during scouting weekends. That fall, a man from a nearby town had been sighted for wandering through campsites late at night. He was known to walk slowly due to an old leg injury, dragging his foot, avoiding confrontation, watching camps out of habit more than threat. He was never violent, just deeply unaware of how he appeared to others. He had been seen near Imar that same weekend. When I think back, the pattern fits. The careful steps, the pause at the tent door, the lack of interaction, someone moving through familiar ground, checking what was there, then leaving when satisfied. That explanation does not make the memory easier. If anything, it makes it heavier. A real person, close enough to touch, standing in the dark while a kid lay awake inside a thin layer of nylon. What stayed with me was not fear of the land or its history. It was the understanding of how fragile safety feels when you are exposed and young, and how thin the line is between imagination and reality when the night is quiet enough to hear every step. I was a kid who wanted to be a hunter without understanding what that meant. I did not come from a family that hunted. No one taught me seasons, laws, ethics, or respect beyond vague warnings about being careful. I learned from magazines, television, and my own imagination. When I got my first BB gun, it felt like permission. It was cheap, light, and barely powerful, but to me it was a weapon and a promise. I spent that summer wandering the woods behind our neighborhood, moving slowly, pretending I knew what I was doing, telling myself I was learning. The woods were not deep, but they felt endless to someone my age. There were narrow deer paths, patches of wet ground, and places where the trees grew thin and crooked. One area always pulled me in. It was lower than the rest, a shallow swamp where the ground stayed soft even in dry weather. When I was very young, I remembered an old farmhouse there. By the time I was old enough to roam alone, it was gone. All that remained was a cracked foundation and a chimney that leaned slightly, half swallowed by brush and moss. The place felt older than the rest of the woods. Even during the day, it was quiet in a way that did not feel peaceful. That evening I stayed out longer than I should have. The sun was sinking, and the light turned flat and colorless. Everything looked gray. Shadows filled the spaces between trees and stayed there. The swamp smelled thick and sour. My shoes sank with each step, and I moved carefully to keep from slipping. I remember thinking I would head back soon, but curiosity kept pushing me forward. I circled the foundation, stepping over broken bricks and rusted metal. The chimney stood alone, dark inside, streaked with white where birds had perched over the years. That was when I heard wings. Not fluttering or quick, but heavy and slow. The sound cut through the quiet and made me freeze. I looked up and saw a large bird land at the top of a dead tree near the edge of the swamp. The tree was bare, tall, and pale against the dim sky. The bird's shape was thick and broad. It settled with a weight that made the branches tremble. I could not see details, only a dark outline and a head that turned slightly. I thought it was an owl. At that age, owl meant mystery and power. I knew almost nothing about them, only that they hunted at night and lived in places like this. I did not think about protection laws or suffering. I thought about proving something to myself. I raised the BB gun, braced it against my shoulder the way I had seen on television, and aimed at the shape on the branch. My hands were shaking, but I told myself that was excitement. The shot cracked the stillness. The sound felt too loud for such a small gun. The bird dropped instantly. As it fell, it let out a sound that ripped through me. It was not a hoot or a screech I recognized. It was raw and sharp, full of panic and pain. It hit the ground out of sight in the brush below the tree. Regret hit me before the echo faded. My stomach tightened, and my chest felt hollow. I had no plan for what came next. I did not know how to approach it or finish it or even look at it. I stood there, frozen, listening to my own breathing. Less than a second later, the woods erupted. The sound came from everywhere. From the trees, from the swamp, from behind me and far ahead. It was a wave of noise that swallowed the place. Screeching, whooping, wailing calls layered over each other until I could not separate them. It did not sound like one animal or even one species. It sounded like the entire forest had reacted at once. The air vibrated. Branches shook. I could hear wings beating overhead, shapes moving through the canopy, bodies shifting from tree to tree. Fear took over completely. Not a slow fear, but a hard rush that shut off thought. I turned and ran. I did not follow the path back. I crashed through brush, slipped in mud, scraped my arms on thorns. The sounds followed me. They did not chase in a straight line, but they stayed around me, circling, calling, overlapping until I could not tell where anything was. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. My breath came in short bursts, and my legs burned. The run home was about a quarter mile, but it felt endless. The woods seemed to close in. Every shadow looked like movement. I expected something to hit me from behind or above. When I broke out of the tree line and into the open yard, the noise stopped as suddenly as it had started. The quiet felt wrong, like pressure in my ears. I did not slow down until I reached the house. I went inside, shut the door, and leaned against it, shaking. I never went back to that spot. Over time, the memory faded. It slipped into the back of my mind, buried under years of other experiences. I grew up. I learned. I became an outdoorsman in a real sense. I studied animals, seasons, tracks, and behavior. I hunted only when it made sense, only for food, and with respect. I learned about owls and their calls, about mobbing behavior, about how birds respond to danger. Still, no matter how much I learned, I could not match what I heard that night to anything familiar. Years later, the memory came back without warning. I was sitting alone late at night, scrolling through videos and recordings. I started looking up owl distress calls from my region. I listened carefully, comparing tones, rhythms, and patterns. Some were harsh. Some were eerie. None were the same. Then I expanded the search. I listened to recordings of crows, ravens, herons, barred owls, screech owls, and even frogs and foxes. I began to understand what likely happened. The bird I shot was probably not an owl at all. In low light, size and shape lie. It could have been a heron or another large wetland bird roosting near the swamp. The sound it made when it fell may have triggered a response. Many birds react to distress calls. Crows, especially, gather and vocalize loudly, often pulling in other species. In a swamp at dusk, sound carries and multiplies. What I heard was likely a cascade of alarm calls, overlapping species reacting to movement, fear, and each other. To a scared kid, it became something monstrous. Understanding that does not erase how it felt. It explains it. The woods did not turn against me. I caused a disruption, and nature responded in the way it always does, fast and loud, and without concern for my feelings. As for my apartment now, the strange experiences followed a similar pattern. Late at night, tired and alone, small sounds grew larger in my mind. Pipes knocking, neighbors moving, wind through poorly sealed windows. Old buildings settle and speak. When I paid attention, when I tested each sound, when I stayed grounded, the fear lost its shape. There was no haunting. There was stress, memory, and a mind trained long ago to listen for danger. That night in the swamp taught me something I did not understand at the time. The woods are not quiet places waiting to be conquered. They are alive, reactive, and indifferent. What terrified me was not something unnatural. It was the sound of a system responding to harm. I ran because I was not ready to face what I had done. I remember it now because I finally am. A few years ago, a group of us decided to hike up to the abandoned zoo in Los Angeles late at night. There were 7 of us. We were young enough to think fear was something you could switch on and off. We wanted to feel it on purpose. We parked at the bottom of the canyon and started walking just after midnight. The city noise faded fast. The trail climbed hard and steady, and the air cooled as we went up. The ground smelled dry and dusty with patches of damp earth where the shade never left. We joked at first and laughed too loud. That did not last long. The hike took close to 2 hours. The first half felt calm in a way that made everything else sharper. Our lights cut small tunnels through the dark and left the rest untouched. The canyon walls rose on both sides and blocked any glow from the city. We saw small animals dart across the trail. Quick shapes close to the ground. We heard the scrape of claws on rock and the soft thud of something landing in brush. An owl passed overhead without sound and settled somewhere above us. Its shape crossed the beam of a flashlight for a moment and then vanished. That was the only thing that gave me a real chill at that point. Everything else felt normal for a night hike. As we climbed higher, the trail narrowed. The plants changed. More scrub and rock. Less dirt. The ground felt loose underfoot. We stopped using our voices. No one said anything out loud, but the group pulled closer together. Our breathing grew louder than we expected. The sound of it bounced back from the canyon walls and made it hard to tell where anyone else was standing unless you could see them. Around the 3/4 mark the trail squeezed into a passage carved into the side of the canyon. The wall pressed in on one side, and the drop fell away on the other. It was not a place where two people could pass. We had to turn our bodies sideways and move one at a time. The rock was cold and smooth in places and sharp in others. I could feel it through my shirt as I leaned into it to keep my balance. That was when the flashlights started to flicker. Not all at once, but enough to notice. One beam dimmed and flared back up. Another cut out for a second and returned weaker. No one reacted much. We had phones. The idea that batteries die was not scary. Still, the timing felt wrong. The light changed the shadows, and the shadows moved in ways that made my eyes work harder. The guy in front slowed, and then stopped. The line backed up until we were pressed close. I was fourth. I leaned forward to see what had caused it. At first I saw nothing. Just rock and darkness. Then something moved into view from around the bend ahead of us. It was a man. He was dressed head to toe in white. His clothes were not clean white. They looked chalked and dusty like they had been rolled in powder. His hair was white too, or maybe just coated. He wore a white top hat that sat stiff and tall on his head. The style felt old, out of place. His clothes hung loose on his frame and moved as he walked. He came toward us without hesitation. The path was so narrow that our backs were flat to the canyon wall. We were turned sideways. There was no space, yet he walked straight through the middle as if the trail were wide and clear. His steps were steady and unhurried. He did not touch the wall. He did not brush against anyone. I could not understand how his shoulders fit where ours barely did. His face was mostly covered, not masked in a theatrical way but wrapped and shaded so that only part of it showed. His posture was upright. His stride had a rhythm to it, almost practiced. He did not look at us. He did not acknowledge our presence at all. He passed close enough that I could smell him. The scent was dry and sharp, like old fabric and dust and something chemical. Lime or chalk maybe. My body locked. My throat tightened and my eyes burned. I felt tears start and hated myself for it. The fear was not loud. It was heavy and sinking. The kind that makes your legs weak and your thoughts slow. I remember thinking that this was not part of any plan. This was not a scare we chose. This was something else. He moved past each of us and continued down the trail. His white shape faded into the dark behind us. No one followed him with a light. No one turned around. The group stayed frozen for a few seconds that felt much longer. Then we started moving again, but not forward. We turned back the way we came without discussion. The decision was instant and shared. The hike down felt longer. The dark pressed closer. Every sound felt intentional. Loose stones sliding under our shoes sounded like footsteps behind us. The owl called again somewhere above, and it felt closer this time. Our phone lights shook in our hands. No one ran. We stayed together and kept moving. As we dropped lower, the air warmed, and the smell of the city returned. Exhaust and pavement and old trash carried up the canyon. The trail widened, and the fear eased enough for my mind to start working again. I tried to make sense of what we saw. A man hiking at night was not impossible. The clothes could have been a costume or work gear. Powder could have been paint or plaster. The abandoned zoo attracts people who want to be seen. Artists, performers, drifters. Someone could have chosen that moment to pass through. Still, the way he fit through the path stayed with me. The way he did not react to us at all stayed with me. The confidence of his walk in a place where one wrong step meant a long fall stayed with me. When we reached the parking area, the lot was empty except for our car. The headlights reflected off dust in the air and off insects that swarmed in tight, fast circles. The points of light moved quick and erratic and vanished when the beams shifted. At first it looked like something else. Then it resolved into what it was. Moths and gnats drawn to the warmth and light after hours of dark. When the lights went off, they disappeared. We stood there longer than needed. No one spoke. We got in the car and left. On the drive home, the city felt louder than before. The streets felt crowded and safe in a way that surprised me. In the days after I looked into the area, I learned about people who camp and wander those hills, about night hikers and costume shoots, and people dealing with things that push them to live outside. Nothing I found broke the rules of reality. Everything fit if I lined it up right. What never fit was how small I felt in that narrow passage. How easily our confidence fell apart. We went up there looking to be scared and found something we did not control. I have not gone back. Not because I believe the place is haunted. Because I learned that fear does not need anything supernatural to take hold. It only needs the right moment and a reminder that other people move through the dark with their own reasons, and their own paths, and they do not always make room for you. I was on a backpacking trip in the Manistee National Forest with my Boy Scout troop when it happened. We were several miles from the nearest road, deep enough that the forest felt closed around us. The trail had narrowed over the afternoon, packed sand turning to pine needles and exposed roots. The air smelled of sap and damp soil. It was late summer, but the light was already thinning by the time we reached our campsite. Trees crowded close, tall and straight, their tops swaying far above us where the wind still moved. We set camp in a small clearing that looked like it had been used many times before. The ground was pressed flat in places, ringed by fire scars and scattered stones. We moved through our routine without much thought. Packs came off. Tents went up. Water was filtered from a slow brown stream that barely made a sound as it passed through reeds. Dinner was simple and quiet. By the time darkness settled in, everyone was tired in the clean way that comes from walking all day under weight. I crawled into my tent early. The nylon walls glowed faintly from headlamps flicking off one by one. Soon the camp went dark. The forest filled the space left behind. Insects hummed low and steady. Leaves brushed together overhead. Somewhere far off, something moved through brush with a soft crackle. None of it felt strange. This was normal. I lay on my back, hands folded on my chest, listening as sleep crept closer. The first sound pulled me awake without warning. It was sharp and high, like a scream stretched thin. It came from far away, but it cut through the night as if it were close. I held my breath, trying to place it. My mind reached for explanations I had learned. Coyotes, foxes, maybe an owl. But the sound rose and fell in a way that did not match the recordings I knew. It lasted only a few seconds, then faded into silence. I waited for another sound. The forest seemed to hold still. Then it came again, longer this time, joined by a second call from a different direction. The two sounds overlapped, climbing and breaking apart. They echoed between the trees, bending with distance. My skin prickled. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter and stared at the dark curve of the tent ceiling. Over the next hour, the noises continued. They came in waves. Sometimes one call, sometimes several. Some were high and thin. Others were rough and broken, like air forced through a narrow throat. Every so often there was a pause long enough that I hoped it was over. Each time the sounds returned, they felt closer, though I could not be sure if that was real or just my fear tightening its grip. At one point, a new sound cut through everything else. It was loud and sudden. A hard crack followed by a hollow thud. It sounded exactly like a wooden bat striking a tree with full force. The noise echoed once, then died. My heart pounded. I lay still, listening for footsteps, for voices, for anything that might explain it. Nothing followed. The forest slipped back into its strange chorus. I lost track of time. My watch face was too dim to read without light, and I did not want to move. The calls rose and fell for what felt like hours. They made sleep impossible. Each sound pushed my thoughts in circles. I imagined injured animals, territorial fights, mating calls gone wrong. I tried to tell myself that everything had a reason, that nothing out there was thinking about me. Still, my body stayed tense, ready for something I could not name. Eventually, the sounds thinned out. The calls grew farther apart, then stopped altogether. When silence finally settled in, it felt heavy instead of calm. I did not relax. I stayed awake until the sky behind the trees began to lighten. Morning came slowly. Pale light filtered through the branches, revealing the campsite as it had been the night before. Nothing looked disturbed. No tents were damaged. No gear was scattered. Birds started up their steady chatter, filling the space left by the night. One by one, the others emerged from their tents. Faces looked drawn and quiet. No one joked. No one laughed. We packed up in near silence. The assistant scoutmaster gathered us briefly and addressed the night without much weight. He brushed it off as high-pitched coyotes, unusual but harmless. He spoke with the calm certainty of an adult who did not want fear to linger. No one challenged him. No one asked questions. We shouldered our packs and moved on. The trail that day felt different. The forest was the same, but my awareness had sharpened. Every snapped twig made me turn. Every patch of thick brush seemed to hide depth that had not been there before. We walked for hours, boots sinking into sand, sweat darkening our shirts. By midday we passed a solo hiker moving in the opposite direction. He stopped when he saw us, his expression tight. He gestured broadly, as if pointing to the woods behind him, his body language tense. Our scoutmaster responded with steady motions, shaking his head, then waving us on. We resumed our hike, leaving the exchange behind us. I did not need words to understand that the man had heard the same night we had. The rest of the trip passed without incident. No more sounds followed us. No signs appeared on the trail. By the time we reached the trailhead, the experience had already begun to fade into something easier to carry. At home, surrounded by familiar walls, the memory dulled. It became a story I told myself was strange but solved. Years later, long after I stopped camping with that troop, I stumbled across a video online. It was a shaky recording posted by someone claiming to be in the Manistee National Forest at night. The sound that came through my speakers stopped me cold. The calls were not identical to what I remembered, but they were close enough to tighten my chest. The same rise and fall. The same layered echo. The comments below the video were full of guesses. Coyotes, foxes, barred owls. People argued back and forth, posting links and studies, trying to pin it down. I started reading more. I learned how coyotes can sound nothing like the yipping packs people expect. I listened to recordings of fox screams, of owls calling across distance, of trees cracking from sudden shifts in temperature, of branches falling under their own weight. I read about beavers slapping water with their tails, about porcupines chewing bark at night, about deer making sharp alarm cries. Each explanation fit a piece of what I had heard. Together, they formed a picture that made sense. The baseball bat sound likely came from a large branch breaking free high above the ground and striking a trunk on the way down. In the dark, with echoes and fear, my mind had sharpened it into something deliberate. The long stretch of calls probably came from multiple animals spread across the forest, their voices bending through distance and terrain. The pauses were just that, pauses, not waiting. Understanding this did not erase the feeling of that night. What stayed with me was not the mystery, but the reminder of how thin the line is between comfort and fear when you are far from everything familiar. The woods had not been threatening us. They had simply been alive, full of sound and movement that did not care whether we understood it. When I think back now, I do not imagine something unknown watching from the trees. I picture a forest doing what it has always done after dark. Animals calling to each other, wood breaking under slow pressure, sound traveling farther than expected through cool night air. We were children in the middle of it, tired and quiet, listening without context. That night taught me respect more than fear. It taught me how quickly the mind fills gaps when it lacks information. It also taught me caution, not about creatures hiding in the dark, but about assuming that quiet means safe and noise means danger. The forest does not adjust itself to human comfort. It simply continues. Knowing that makes me more careful when I step into it, and more honest about how small I am once the light fades. Last year I drove up to Lassen Volcanic on a clear morning with no real plan beyond hiking to the thermal vents and getting out of my head for a day. I had been camping nearby and woke up early, the kind of early where the air still feels unused. The drive-in was quiet. The road wound through tall pines and wide stretches of burned forest where blackened trunks stood like poles. I remember thinking how open it felt and how exposed. When I pulled into the trailhead parking lot, there were only a few cars. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The moment I shut off my engine, a tight feeling settled in my chest. It was not panic. It was more like my body noticed something before my mind did. I sat there longer than usual, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the ticking sound of the engine cooling. The forest was quiet in a way that felt heavy. No birds, no wind. I told myself it was nothing. I had hiked alone plenty of times. I grabbed my pack, locked the car, and stepped onto the trail. The trail started gently, packed dirt with pine needles pressed into it, the smell sharp and clean. Steam from distant vents drifted through the trees in thin white streaks. The further I walked, the stronger the uneasy feeling became. It followed me like a shadow. Every sound felt too loud. Every quiet stretch felt wrong. I kept stopping and turning around, scanning the trees, telling myself I was being stupid. The trail was well marked. The park was open. It was the middle of the day. As I climbed higher, the ground changed. The dirt turned pale and gritty. The air smelled like sulfur and wet stone. The vents came into view, hissing softly, the ground around them stained yellow and white. Heat rose from cracks in the earth. I stood there longer than I planned, watching the steam curl and disappear. The place felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. Not magical, not mysterious, just powerful and careless. The kind of place that did not notice whether you were there or not. I decided not to linger. The feeling in my chest had not eased at all. If anything, it had grown sharper. I turned around and started back down the trail, retracing my steps. At first, everything felt normal again. My boots hit the dirt in a steady rhythm. My breathing slowed. I focused on the trail ahead of me. Then I heard it. A low growl came from somewhere off the trail. It was deep and rough, not loud, but close enough that my entire body locked up before I had time to think. I froze mid-step. My heart slammed so hard it felt like it shook my ribs. I did not move my head at first. I listened. The forest felt like it was holding its breath with me. I slowly turned my head, scanning the trees, the brush, the rocks along the slope. Nothing moved. No shape stood out. I told myself it might have been my imagination, or some distant sound carrying strangely. I waited another few seconds, then took a careful step forward. That was when I heard leaves rustle and twigs snap. The sound was heavier this time. Deliberate. Close. I looked again, my eyes tracing the edge of the trail, the dark shadows under the trees. Then I saw it. A black bear stepped into clearer view about 40 yards away. It was large, solid, its fur dull and thick. It was walking in the same direction I was, away from where the vents were, moving parallel to the trail but slightly downhill. I stopped breathing. The bear did not look at me. It did not rush. It just walked, head low, shoulders rolling with each step. I could hear its movement through the brush. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt hollow. I knew better. Running would be the worst thing I could do. I stayed still and watched it, my eyes never leaving its shape. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might give me away. After a moment, I began to move again, placing each foot slowly, carefully, making as little noise as possible. I kept my body angled toward the bear, not turning my back, not letting myself lose sight of it. For what felt like a long time, we moved like that. Me on the trail, the bear in the brush, both heading in the same direction. The distance between us stayed about the same. It never acknowledged me. That somehow made it worse. I was not a threat. I was not even worth noticing. Eventually, the bear drifted further downslope and disappeared behind thicker trees. I waited, standing there, muscles burning from tension. I listened hard. No more growls. No more snapping branches. Just the faint sound of wind high in the canopy. When I reached the meadow near the end of the trail, the space opened up suddenly. The grass was low and dry. The trees pulled back. I could see far in every direction. That was when fear took over completely. I broke into a run without thinking. I ran hard, lungs burning, legs screaming, not slowing until I could see the parking lot through the trees. I reached my car 2 miles later, hands shaking as I unlocked it. I threw my pack in the back, slammed the door, and started the engine. I did not sit there to calm down. I drove off immediately, gravel popping under my tires. I went to a different part of the park that was crowded with hikers and families. I stayed near people the rest of the day. I never told myself I had overreacted. I knew I had not. That was not the only time something like that happened. Another day, months later, my friend and I went to Secret Sidewalk in Niles Canyon. It is an old aqueduct, concrete and narrow, clinging to the hillside above the creek. Parts of it have been left to crumble. Other sections have been partially demolished. The place feels forgotten, even though it is close to towns and roads. We climbed up to the aqueduct and walked along it carefully, watching our footing. The concrete was cracked and uneven. Leaves had piled up in corners. The canyon below was steep and thick with brush. The air smelled damp and earthy. We walked all the way to the end, where the structure had been broken apart. Rebar stuck out at odd angles. Concrete slabs lay tilted and cracked. We took a few pictures and turned back. On the way back, the quiet felt different. Not peaceful. Tense. The canyon swallowed sound. Our footsteps echoed softly against the concrete. Halfway back, we heard a sudden, violent rustling of leaves and branches somewhere below us. It was loud enough to stop us both instantly. The sound was not small. It was not a squirrel or a bird. Branches snapped. Leaves tore. Something heavy moved through the brush with force. We stood still, hearts pounding, scanning the slope. The brush was too thick to see into clearly. Shadows layered over shadows. Whatever made the noise did not show itself. There are no large animals known to hang out there. Not like that. The sound was too big, too careless. It did not move like a person trying to be quiet. It did not move like something light. It moved like weight pushing through obstacles. The noise stopped as suddenly as it started. We stayed frozen, listening, waiting for another sound. Nothing came. The canyon settled back into silence, but it did not feel the same. The space felt occupied, even though we could not see anything. After a long moment, we started moving again, slowly, every sense stretched thin. We did not hear it again. We reached the spot where we had climbed up and got down without incident. Once we were back on the ground and walking away, my shoulders finally dropped. The tension drained out of me in a wave that left me shaky and tired. I have replayed both of those experiences in my head many times. There was nothing supernatural about either of them. No unknown creatures. No impossible events. Just wild places, abandoned structures, and things that live or move in them without caring who crosses their path. The fear came from understanding how small and exposed I was in those moments. At Lassen, the bear did not need to attack me for the situation to be dangerous. Its presence alone was enough. In Niles Canyon, whatever moved through that brush reminded me that even near civilization, there are pockets of space where control is an illusion. Since then, I pay closer attention to that uneasy feeling. I do not dismiss it as nerves. I do not try to push through it to prove something to myself. Those places did not mean me harm, but they also did not owe me safety. I left both times under my own power, unharmed, because I listened and reacted when it mattered. That is what stays with me. Not the fear itself, but the clarity that came with it. I have spent a lot of time in the woods, and most of it has been good, but some of it has stayed with me in ways I did not expect. This happened in the summer of 2019, in the Adirondack Mountains near Warrensburg, New York. It was not my first time camping, and it was not my first uneasy night outside, but it was the most recent and the one that still comes back to me when I lie awake in unfamiliar places. We were camping with my girlfriend and her family. Her parents had bought a camper the year before, and it still felt new inside. Everything smelled clean and unused, like plastic and fresh fabric. The floor did not creak much. The cabinets closed softly. It felt solid in a way tents never do. We were set up in a campground that was not crowded but not empty either. Trees spaced out enough to let moonlight through. Gravel pads for campers. A fire ring that had been used earlier in the evening. It was quiet in the way summer nights get quiet after people settle down. Inside the camper, the sleeping arrangement was tight but comfortable. I was on the bottom bunk along one side. Her younger sister was asleep on the top bunk above me. My girlfriend was on the main bed closer to the front. Her parents were already asleep. The air inside was still warm from the day. A small fan hummed somewhere near the ceiling. The window next to my bunk was tilted open, just enough to let air in. It had dark tinting, so even in daylight, it was hard to see through from the outside. I was lying on my back scrolling on my phone. The glow was low but noticeable in the dark. I remember thinking I should put it away and sleep because we had planned to hike in the morning. The campground had gone quiet. No engines, no voices, just insects and the distant sound of wind moving through the trees. Gravel is a sound you learn to notice when you camp. It is sharp and specific. It does not blend into the background. That was when I heard it. At first it was faint, a soft crunch that did not match the rhythm of animals. It was slow and deliberate. Then another. Then another. The sound was coming from outside the camper, moving along the gravel pad. Each step was spaced evenly. I stopped scrolling and listened. My phone was still in my hand. The sound moved closer, passing along the side of the camper. I could tell it was only 2 feet. Not 4. Not a scurry. Not a shuffle. It was the weight and timing of a person walking carefully. My chest tightened in that quiet way fear arrives before your mind catches up. I did not move. I did not sit up. I just listened. The steps came closer until they stopped. The sound stopped right next to where my head was resting, right outside my window. The window was tilted open. Only a few inches, but enough. The tint made it impossible to see anything outside. All I could see was darkness and a faint reflection of the inside of the camper. I became aware of the light from my phone and how it must look from outside. A bright rectangle in a dark forest. I shut it off immediately and held it against my chest. The camper felt smaller. The air felt thicker. I was sure that whoever was outside could see me clearly a second before the screen went dark. I lay there listening as hard as I could. I tried to slow my breathing. The person outside did not move right away. The gravel did not shift. There was no cough or clearing of a throat, just stillness. That silence was worse than the sound. My mind filled in shapes and intentions without permission. I thought about the thin wall between us. I thought about the window. I thought about how quiet everyone else was. After what felt like a long time, but was probably less than a minute, the footsteps started again. They moved away from the window slowly. Each step felt louder than before. They went past the back of the camper and faded into the darker part of the site. I did not move until the sound was completely gone. I reached for my phone again and typed a message to my girlfriend in the dark. I kept the brightness as low as I could. I told her what I had heard and where it had stopped. I did not try to make it sound calm. I needed her to know exactly what had happened. A moment later she responded and confirmed she had heard it too. That alone made it worse. It meant I was not imagining it. We lay there listening. Every small sound outside felt sharp. A branch snapping somewhere farther away. Leaves shifting. Insects brushing against the camper walls. Then we heard something else. The sound of fabric moving. A zipper. Not fast. Not frantic. Just the steady sound of a zipper being pulled open. Then more rustling. The 2 tents set up near us were about 10 feet away. Friends of the family had used them earlier in the evening, but they were empty that night. The rustling continued. It sounded like hands moving through bags. Like someone searching. The zipper sound happened again. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was had moved from the camper to the tents. That felt intentional. That felt like someone checking places where people sleep. My girlfriend got up and went to her parents. I stayed where I was, staring at the dark window. I listened to every sound while they woke up. The camper shifted as people moved around. A flashlight clicked on somewhere. Time stretched again. Nothing outside moved anymore. No footsteps. No rustling. Just the normal night sounds returning slowly. Her parents waited before going outside. It felt like a long wait. Long enough for whoever it was to be gone. When they finally stepped out, I could hear their footsteps on the gravel. I could hear them moving around the site. The flashlight beam cut through the trees. I stayed inside with her sister still asleep above me. Minutes passed. They checked around the tents. They checked around the camper. There was nothing. No one. No signs of anyone leaving. No broken branches or disturbed ground that stood out in the dark. Eventually they came back inside. The door closed. The lock slid into place. The camper felt sealed again, but the feeling did not go away. We did not sleep much after that. Every sound woke me. I kept replaying the moment the footsteps stopped outside my window. I kept imagining a face inches from the glass. Morning came slowly. The light made everything feel less threatening, but more real. When we went outside, the first thing I saw was the tents. Both were unzipped. The flaps were open wider than they had been left. The bags inside were disturbed. Not destroyed. Just moved. Things shifted around as if someone had looked through them without rushing. Nothing important was missing. That almost made it worse. It suggested curiosity instead of desperation. The neighboring camper belonged to an older couple. They mentioned they had heard something during the night as well. Footsteps and movement near their site. They had stayed inside and waited. No one had approached them directly. They had seen nothing when they checked in the morning. We packed up later that day. The mood was quiet. Everyone moved with a little more focus than usual. The campground looked normal. Families cooking breakfast. Kids riding bikes. Sunlight through the trees. Nothing about it suggested what had happened hours earlier. I spent the drive home thinking about explanations. The Adirondacks are not empty. People move through them for all kinds of reasons. Some camp. Some wander. Some look for things that are not theirs. The most likely explanation was someone checking campsites at night, seeing what was unlocked, what was easy. The light from my phone probably drew them in. The tents were an easier target once they realized people were awake inside the camper. That explanation fits every part of what happened. The careful footsteps. The pause at the window. The move to the tents. The lack of damage. The disappearance once lights came on. Nothing about it required anything unreal. That did not make it easier to accept. We did not go back to that area the following year. No one said it directly, but it was understood. The woods did not feel the same after that night. They felt less neutral, less passive. I still camp. I still enjoy being outside, but I no longer assume the dark is empty. I close the windows at night. I turn off my phone early, and when gravel shifts near where I sleep, I wake up immediately and listen.